The pen hovered just a breath above the paper. Across the polished table, the billionaire's hand shook so badly the ink trembled in his signature line, like his body already knew this was the moment his life would collapse. His suit was perfect. But his face wasn't. Sweat gathered at his temple. His throat worked like he was swallowing a stone. Around him, lawyers sat stiff and silent, eyes fixed on the bankruptcy document as if it were a coffin lid waiting to be closed. Then, barely audible, someone spoke. "Sir, please don't sign that." A waitress stood at the edge of the room, still holding a tray. Her uniform was worn, her fingers damp from service, but her eyes were locked on the papers like she had just seen something no one else noticed. The head lawyer snapped, "This is a private meeting. Get out." But the billionaire didn't move. He stared at her, half angry, half desperate, because for the first time in weeks, someone in that room sounded certain. The waitress stepped closer, voice trembling but firm. "There's a mistake," she said, pointing to one line. A big one. The billionaire's hand froze over the signature line. And in that silence, everyone realized, one tiny error might decide whether he loses everything, or whether the whole truth is about to explode. Now to the story in full. Daniel Adabio grew up in a neighborhood where ambition was dangerous. People there learned early to keep their heads down, take what was offered, and survive. But Daniel's father had filled him with a different kind of hunger. Every evening after work, smelling of diesel and rope burn, the old man would sit on their small veranda and point toward the distant port lights. "That's where the world moves," he would say. "If you're smart enough, you move with it." Daniel had been smart. Ruthlessly so. He studied logistics at night while working loading docks during the day. He memorized shipping routes, customs regulations, fuel cost margins. By 28, he had saved enough to lease a single truck. By 35, he owned a fleet. By 40, Adabio Global Logistics controlled supply chains across 6 countries. Investors called him a visionary. Magazines featured him on covers. But Daniel never forgot the smell of his father's work shirts or the sound of his mother counting coins at the kitchen table. That memory kept him grounded, kept him careful. Until it didn't. 3 years ago, flush with success, he expanded too fast. New ports in unstable regions. Currency hedges that failed. Partners who promised stability and delivered chaos. Then the global economy tightened like a fist. Credit dried up. Contracts were renegotiated or abandoned. One by one, his safety nets disappeared. He had trusted his CFO, Victor Mensa, to manage the numbers while he focused on operations. Victor had charts, projections, reassurances. But the reassurances were built on sand. And now, Daniel sat in a bankruptcy meeting, his father's legacy about to be auctioned off in pieces. Until a waitress spoke. Amara Okoy folded her uniform slowly, carefully, as if the thin fabric might tear if she moved too fast. The staff changing room was small and windowless, tucked behind the cafe kitchen like an afterthought. One flickering bulb buzzed overhead. The air smelled of soap, steam, and tired bodies. She pressed her palms together, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, just like her mother used to teach her when panic crept in. Years ago, Amara had been a different person. A student. Not a dreamer with her head in the clouds, but a practical one. Numbers made sense to her. Balance sheets, columns, logic. Where others saw confusion, she saw patterns. Her father had been a bus driver who believed deeply in education. Every night, no matter how tired, he would sit with her at the table while she studied. "Numbers don't lie," he used to say. "If you learn to understand them, they'll protect you." She had believed him. She studied accounting at a local polytechnic. Nothing fancy, no big name, but she was good. Very good. Lecturers noticed. One even told her once, smiling, "You have a sharp eye. Don't lose it." Then life happened. Her father fell ill suddenly. Hospital bills stacked up faster than Numbers ever had in her textbooks. Her mother tried to keep things together, but grief and stress hollowed her out. Amara dropped out during her second year. Just temporarily, she told herself. Just until things stabilized. They never did. One job turned into another. Shop assistant. Cleaner. Server. Waitress. Each time, she told herself it was only for now. Still, the habit of noticing never left her. She noticed prices, receipts, contracts customers left behind on tables. She noticed when numbers didn't line up, when something felt off. That instinct was what had stopped her upstairs. And now, standing alone in the changing room, Amara wondered if she had just ruined everything. The next morning arrived with a sky the color of dull silver. Amara stood outside the glass tower that housed Adabio Global Logistics, her palms damp despite the cool air. She checked the message on her phone again. 8:30 a.m., Conference Room C, Mr. Adabio will be present. Her stomach tightened. The elevator ride felt too fast. When she entered the conference room, Daniel Adabio stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. Around the table sat 2 lawyers and a financial analyst, all with open laptops and stacks of documents. Their eyes flicked toward Amara as she entered, curiosity mixed with thinly veiled skepticism. Daniel gestured to an empty seat beside him. Not at the end of the table. Beside him. The room noticed. Start with what you saw, Daniel said. Amara opened the file placed in front of her. Her fingers steadied as she scanned the page. This acquisition was structured with deferred liability because the Port Authority retained partial operational control. That usually means shared exposure. But here, the debt is consolidated as immediate and total. That inflates the company's liability on paper. She flipped a page. And this clause here references an amendment that was never countersigned. The analyst's fingers flew over his keyboard. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Clause after clause, deal after deal. And each time, the pattern became clearer. Someone, whether through negligence or intent, had bundled liabilities aggressively, creating a picture far darker than reality. The analyst finally sat back. If we separate these correctly, your solvency ratio changes completely. Daniel exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, he said, that word doesn't sound like a joke. He looked at Amara. Do you realize what you've done? She shook her head. I just organized what was already there. That's exactly what leadership is, Daniel said softly. By the 3rd day, word had spread. Not loudly, not officially, but in offices like these, information traveled faster than memos. People whispered about the waitress. Some were curious. Some amused. Some irritated. And a few were afraid. Conference Room C was tense that morning before Amara even sat down. Daniel Adabio stood at the head of the table, reviewing a report on his tablet. Across from him sat Victor Mensa, the company's chief financial officer. A tall man with sharp cheekbones and a calm, unreadable expression. Victor had been with the company for over a decade. Trusted. Respected. Untouchable. Until now. We need to talk about the irregularities in the debt consolidation, Daniel said without looking up. Victor nodded smoothly. We've already addressed those in the restructuring proposal. Amara glanced at the documents in front of her, then spoke quietly. The restructuring proposal still lists liabilities that shouldn't legally transfer for another 4 months. Victor's gaze shifted to her. Slow. Deliberate. Cold. And you are, he asked, though everyone in the room knew he already knew. Amara Okoy, she said. I'm consulting on the audit. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Consulting. I see. And what firm are you with? She's independent, Daniel cut in. Victor leaned back in his chair. With respect, Daniel, we're dealing with complex financial instruments here. Not cafe menus. The room went silent. Amara felt heat rise to her face, but she didn't look away. Complex or not, she said evenly, Clause 14b was misapplied. And so were Clauses 9a, 11c, and 18d. Unless you're saying the acquisition agreements were drafted incorrectly. Victor's jaw tightened. I'm saying you're out of your depth. Daniel stood. Then prove her wrong, Victor. Line by line. Victor stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then he closed his folder. I don't think that will be necessary. Victor Mensah didn't storm out. That wasn't his style. Instead, he stood slowly, adjusted his cufflinks, and offered Daniel a cold, tight smile. I'll have my resignation letter on your desk by end of day, he said. His voice was calm, professional, but his eyes carried something darker. After a decade of service, this is how it ends. Replaced by someone who couldn't even finish school. Amara's breath caught, but she said nothing. Daniel's expression didn't change. Your resignation is accepted. Victor nodded once, gathered his things, and left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the financial analyst broke the silence. We need to move fast. If Victor controls any external narratives. Daniel's phone buzzed. Then again. And again. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. Too late. By noon, the damage was already spreading. An anonymous source, described only as a senior executive within Adabio Global, had leaked a statement to 3 major financial outlets. The company, the source claimed, was attempting to manipulate its debt reports to mislead creditors. Worse, it alleged that Daniel Adabio had hired unqualified consultants to fabricate favorable audits. The press ran with it. Headlines appeared within the hour. Adabio Global under investigation for financial misconduct. Billionaire accused of audit fraud amid bankruptcy crisis. Creditors who had been waiting for clarity now demanded immediate answers. 2 key partners suspended operations pending review. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting. Daniel stood by the window, phone in hand, watching the city below. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had 3 days ago. Behind him, Amara sat quietly, staring at her hands. I'm sorry, she said softly. Daniel turned. For what? For making things worse. He shook his head. You didn't do this. Victor did. And he did it because we got too close to the truth. He looked back out the window. Now we have to prove it. Fast. The boardroom was nothing like Conference Room C. It was larger, colder, designed to intimidate. 12 directors sat around a long table, their faces carved from stone. At the far end sat the chairman, a gray-haired man named Chief Okonkwo, who had made his fortune in oil before age 40 and his reputation by crushing competitors. He looked at Amara the way someone might look at a stain on expensive fabric. Miss Okoy, he began, voice dry and sharp, we've been told you have evidence that our CFO manipulated our liability reports. Evidence strong enough to halt bankruptcy proceedings and accuse a man of impeccable reputation. Amara stood, folder in hand, her throat tight. Around the table, she saw doubt, irritation, and in some faces, barely concealed hostility. One director leaned back with arms crossed. Another whispered to his neighbor. Daniel sat to her left, silent, letting her lead. She had insisted on it. If she couldn't defend the numbers herself, they would never trust her. The evidence is in the acquisition agreements, Amara said, keeping her voice steady. Clause 14b alone accounts for $18 million in liabilities that were incorrectly consolidated. Chief Okonkwo waved a hand dismissively. Victor Mensah has been with this company for 11 years. You've been here 3 days. That's true, Amara replied. But the documents don't care how long I've been here. They care about what's legally binding. She opened the folder and placed copies in front of each board member. The Eastern Port acquisition specified a phased transfer. Only 60% of the debt was supposed to apply immediately. The remaining 40% stays with the holding company until year 5. We're 4 months short of that. One director frowned, flipping through the pages. Another adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. If this is accurate, someone muttered, it changes everything. Chief Okonkwo's expression didn't soften, but his tone shifted slightly. Go on. Amara took a breath and continued. Amara didn't sleep that night. Long after the board meeting ended, she sat in the small office Daniel had given her, surrounded by files that smelled of old paper and dust. Her eyes burned, but she couldn't stop. Something Victor had said during his resignation kept replaying in her mind. After a decade of service. A decade. That was a long time to build trust. Long enough to hide things in plain sight. She pulled up the company's expense reports for the last 8 years, then cross-referenced them with vendor contracts. At first, nothing stood out. Maintenance fees, logistics consulting, port upgrades. Standard operating costs. But then she noticed a pattern. The same 3 companies appeared repeatedly. Green Line Maritime Services. Apex Logistics Consulting. Coastal Infrastructure Limited. Each had been paid millions over the years. She searched for their business registrations. Green Line Maritime Services was registered to a P.O. box in a neighboring country. No website. No staff directory. Apex Logistics Consulting had a website, but it hadn't been updated in 4 years. The portfolio section showed stock photos. Coastal Infrastructure Limited listed its CEO as a man named Peter Nwankwo. Amara ran his name through the corporate registry. Peter Nwankwo was Victor Mensah's brother-in-law. Her heart pounded. She pulled every invoice, every contract, every payment record tied to those 3 companies. Fake maintenance schedules. Consulting fees for reports that were never delivered. Equipment purchases with no corresponding asset entries. It was a system. Carefully built. Quietly efficient. Victor hadn't just manipulated the debt. He had been siphoning money for years, hiding it in shell companies, then using the financial chaos to cover his tracks. Amara's hands shook as she compiled the evidence. When the sun rose, she walked into Daniel's office and placed the folder on his desk. It's worse than we thought, she said. Daniel opened the folder. His face went pale. How much? At least 42 million, Amara whispered. Maybe more. The discovery changed everything. It wasn't just about correcting liabilities anymore. It was about survival. With Victor's leaks poisoning the press and creditors circling like wolves, Adabio Global was running out of time. The company had reserves, but they were restricted. Funds earmarked for emergency operations, employee severance, environmental compliance. Legally untouchable under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Daniel sat across from his lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Folake Adeyemi, who had been reviewing the corporate charter for hours. There's a provision, Folake said slowly, tapping the document. Section 12, subsection 4. It allows for the temporary reallocation of contingency reserves in the event of existential threat to operations, provided the board votes with a 2/3 majority and the funds are repaid within 18 months. Daniel leaned forward. Existential threat. Can we prove that? If the ports shut down, 3,000 people lose their jobs immediately, Folake replied. That's existential. Amara sat quietly in the corner, listening. But the board has to approve it, Folake continued. And after the scandal Victor created, half of them think you're covering up fraud. Daniel rubbed his face. Then we don't just ask for a vote. We show them the shell companies. We show them Victor's theft. We prove we're not the problem, he was. Folake nodded. It's risky. If even one director leaks this before we're ready, the creditors will move to seize assets immediately. Then we move fast, Daniel said. He looked at Amara. Can you present the findings? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Good, Daniel said. Because if we don't get this right, we're done. The emergency board meeting was called for the next morning. The margin between survival and collapse had never been thinner. The second board meeting was nothing like the first. This time, the room wasn't just tense. It was burning. News of Victor's shell companies had leaked, not from Daniel's side but from a journalist who had been digging independently. The story broke 2 hours before the meeting. By the time the directors arrived, their phones were flooded with messages from investors, stakeholders, and reporters. Chief Okonkwo entered last, his face a mask of controlled fury. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table and looked directly at Daniel. "Is it true?" he asked. "Every word," Daniel replied. He nodded to Amara. She stood and distributed the evidence. Bank transfers. Fake invoices. Corporate registrations linking the shell companies directly to Victor Mensa. The room was silent as they read. One director swore under his breath. Another closed the folder and sat back, shaking his head. "This isn't just fraud," someone said quietly. "This is systematic theft." Chief Okonkwo finally sat. "Where is Victor now?" "His lawyer says he's unavailable for comment," Folake said. "We've forwarded everything to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. They're opening an investigation." The chairman nodded slowly. Then he looked at Amara. "You found all of this?" "Yes, sir." For the first time, his expression softened. Just slightly. "You saved this company?" Amara didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. The vote to reallocate the contingency reserves passed unanimously. Within days, the ports were operational again. Shipments resumed. Employees returned to work. 2 weeks later, Victor Mensa was arrested at the airport, attempting to board a flight to Dubai. The charges included fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The trial would take months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Daniel stood in his office the day the news broke, staring out at the city below. Amara entered quietly. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "We did." Amara smiled. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. She enrolled back in school the following semester. This time, she finished. And when she graduated, Daniel offered her a position, not as a consultant, but as chief financial officer. "Numbers don't lie," he said, echoing her father's words. "And neither do you." Amara accepted. Because integrity, she had learned, wasn't about where you started. It was about refusing to stay silent when the truth needed a voice. If this story reminded you why honesty still matters, why second chances are real, and why one voice can change everything, I'd love for you to subscribe. This channel only grows because people like you believe stories like this are worth sharing. If you've made it this far, you're part of this community. Don't just watch, stay. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep building something that matters.